Thank you, everybody, for coming on the second to last, penultimate day, right, of classes, and our last care panel for this semester. I'm super excited about our panel discussion, so I'm going to sort of get through just some announcements about things that are upcoming, just so that you know. So one thing that is very relevant to the January care panel is, so the January care panel is about the ethics of community involvement in research, what it means to include community members. And CCTS is actually doing a patient and community peer review academy that you get a $300 honorarium to participate in. You can't be a student or affiliate of OSU, so probably many of you are not going to be, but if you know people, I don't know how, oh yeah. If you know people that might be interested in doing community review for research protocols, this is interesting. And then the other thing is, I just passed around the series for the spring. We have a bunch of really interesting discussions, and I hope to see you there. The one final thing that I wanted to mention is we are going to start doing a training program for the responsible conduct of research for graduate students, professional students, postdocs, and basically junior researchers and junior faculty. And it's designed so that you could sort of write it on your study protocols, and you could get more information from chv.osu.edu care training program. So besides that, so today we're going to be talking about, so welcome. Some of you have not come to one of these before. This is the Center for Ethics and Human Values runs a monthly series called Conversations About Research Ethics. And basically what we do is we talk about issues that are really ethically difficult for people that are trying to do the right thing, not for the people that are trying to like cut the corners. So like for, you know, conscientious researchers that are really engaged in important socially valuable research, there's still going to be ethical issues. And we try and do it from an interdisciplinary perspective where we bring people across campus and across sort of colleges together to talk about issues and share their sort of perspectives. So today we're going to be actually doing something a little bit different. Usually we have just sort of a theme that is large, and we sort of talk about in abstract some of these issues. And today we're going to be doing two cases. So the cases, I think, are really interesting, and they bring up the ways in which when we're engaging in research that has global reach and potentially requires researchers to travel to different places to engage in the research, how do you conduct that research ethically, in the most ethical manner, in the most inclusive manner, especially when part of the relationship with the researchers and local community members might not be set up prior to the research actually taking place there. So we're going to have so we're going to have three panelists. The first panelist is Lauren Taylor, who's a fifth-year doctoral student in health policy and management, and she studies the ethics of global health research and project management at Harvard University. She is big on the screen because she is also stuck under snow in New York City currently. She's also the author of The American Healthcare Paradox, and she's going to spend about 15 minutes talking about a really interesting case related, that was sort of the, it's related to a psychiatric study that took place in a prayer camp in Ghana. That was a joint research project between professors of psychiatry and public health at the University of Ghana and at Yale. After that, Roxanna Sierra Hernandez, who is from OSU and is part of the Byrd Polar and Climate Research Center, is going to be talking about her own experiences conducting research on expeditions, and in particular, a really interesting case that happened over the summer in Peru. So Roxanna is here, and Hernandez is going to be talking for 15 minutes. And then we will have sort of Professor Cohen, Jeffrey Cohen, who's a professor of anthropology, who has done a lot of research on migration, on nutrition, in lots of different places, including Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and Turkey. So he's going to be bringing in his own perspective as an anthropologist, thinking through some of these ethical issues. So we're going to have sort of 45 minutes of them presenting their thoughts and experiences. I have some preset questions, but then we're going to open it up to you guys and hopefully have a conversation with everybody about what you think about these cases, and we'll take it from there. All right, so the first person that is up on the docket is Lauren, and I think that you have control over the PowerPoint, if that's correct, right? Yeah.
I should, yes. Let's see. If only I didn't have so many windows open. Here we go. Apologies. Okay. Hopefully you all can see that now. Is that up on your screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I am so delighted to be here. I'm sorry that I'm not there in the flesh. I had one flight and then a subsequent flight canceled this morning. But it's a delight to be with you all and be thinking about research ethics. I'm going to jump right in to giving you a little bit of a précis to this really interesting randomized control trial that Dana was mentioning. You should know that these are slides that are derived from a paper that's under review, and it's a behemoth of a paper. It's like 10,000 words, and that's because there's a lot of nuance and a lot of contextual detail that is relevant, I think, to an ethical analysis of the case. I'm not going to be able to give all of that here, but I'm really happy to talk about it once we get to kind of the Q&A portion. So I'm going to put forward kind of bullet points, if you will, of top line, interesting questions and tidbits, recognizing that there's probably going to be more questions outstanding, and I look forward to engaging them. So just a little bit about me. Dana ran through some of this, but I am a fifth-year doctoral candidate at Harvard. I study health policy and management, and I have this really long-standing interest in the relationship to wrongdoing. So I'm interested in all sorts of illicit actors and how governments and individuals and organizations that see themselves as doing good in the world should think about engaging or not engaging, recognizing or not recognizing those illicit actors. So this work is, of course, about a kind of illicit actor that is a Pentecostal prayer camp in Ghana that has a long track record of human rights abuses. But in other work, I think about things like, should you accept donations from people like Jeffrey Epstein or the Sacklers, who are the first family of Purdue Pharmaceuticals? So this is kind of a theme in my work. The work that I'm going to present today has a co-author, Thad Saeed, who's here at Harvard Medical School. He is on faculty, and he and I have been kicking around these ideas for a number of years. We teach global health ethics together. So in some sense, this paper is derived from our repeated teaching of the case, and the paper is under review at Kennedy Institute of Ethics. So the case background. The case I'm going to talk about is called the Joining Forces Project, or the Joining Forces Study. And it was a controversial field-based randomized control trial at this Pentecostal prayer camp called Mount Horeb Prayer Camp in Ghana. It's in the Aburi region, so the eastern region, just about an hour and a half outside of the capital, Accra. And just to be clear, I was not a member of the study team, meaning I wasn't on the paper as an author when the randomized control trial was published. Rather, I was invited by the principal investigator to kind of layer on top and do kind of research on the research. So there was the randomized control trial, and then I was a qualitative researcher watching how this research unfolded. That was my role. When the randomized control trial got published in the British Journal of Psychiatry in 2018, it was flanked by fairly sharp critiques that raised real ethical concerns that the project, the whole, both the engagement with the prayer camp, the way it was done as a randomized control trial was at least ethically dubious, if not outright unethical. And that's some of what I want to explore today with you guys. So I think there's three kind of nested questions. And again, this is in the spirit of putting food for thought out. Happy to return to any of these. I'm going to tick through them quickly, but I think the first question is a question about the ethics of engagement. So is any kind of collaboration between a research team, and in this case, the research team was based at the University of Ghana Medical School, and a prayer camp that has this track record of human rights abuses appropriate? Should any kind of collaboration exist? And there were plenty of people both inside of Ghana and, as you will see in some of the published critiques, that said no kind of collaboration is appropriate. It's unethical even to go in and forget joining forces, like even the idea of recognizing the prayer camp as a potential partner in care delivery was lending that prayer camp undue legitimacy. The second question is kind of like the meso level, and that question deals with kind of the design of the research. So I said before that this research took the form of a randomized control trial. And as I'll show you, some people had real questions about whether or not a randomized control trial was really the right design, given the nature of the study team's interest. I would, in the paper, I make an argument based on the data that I collected that really the deep interest of the study team was to change the behavior of this Pentecostal prayer camp away from what had been documented as their human rights abuses or torturous practices. And so the question is a randomized control trial an appropriate vehicle if your goal is really behavior change? And then the final question that I wanted to put forward to you all is I'll show you that inside the randomized control trial, there was really incomplete disclosure about what the role of the prayer camp was. The prayer camp understood itself as a collaborator on the research, which is completely fair given that the name of the research was the Joining Forces study or the Joining Forces project. It connotes this idea of joining traditional medical practitioners, psychologists and psychiatrists from the University of Ghana Medical School, and the staff and the leadership of the prayer camp. But in fact, I think if you look closely, you see that the prayer camp was actually part of the research, meaning their behavior was under study. They were participants in the research. And that was not clear to them at all. In fact, I think right up until basically the study was published, they were not fully aware that they were being studied. And so the question is, was that kind of incomplete disclosure by the research team defensible, legitimate, appropriate? So that's the third question. I just wanted to show you the abstract of the published randomized control trial. As I said, it was called Joining Psychiatric Care and Faith Healing. Kind of colloquially, it was known as the Joining Forces Project. And so if anyone wants to go and look at the full text of this, it's published. It has been published for now almost a year. And I'll walk you through some of this in a bit more detail now. So Mount Horeb, just to give you a sense of what this study setting was like, and I pause on that because remember, this was both the study setting and the Mount Horeb Prayer Camp was in some sense a collaborator on the project. But the Mount Horeb Prayer Camp is a prayer camp in rural Ghana. Its mission is to set the captives free from the bondage of Satan through a ministry of fasting and prayer. And so the way that these prayer camps work is you've got to understand the notion of prayer camps set against the general mental health service availability in Ghana. So Ghana is a country of 25 million people, and it has 1,500 inpatient psychiatric beds in 3 psychiatric hospitals. That is woefully inadequate for the prevalence of severe psychiatric illness. And so in part because the formal psychiatric sector cannot meet the needs of the Ghanaian population, there is this kind of what some people might call a shadow sector of almost entirely unregulated prayer camps. These prayer camps often act as inpatient, sometimes long-term residences for people with serious mental illness. And so families will often bring ill loved ones to a prayer camp and essentially give them over to the prophet and the staff and say, I cannot care for this person at home anymore. Will you take them for me? And the idea is that initially families will pay a monthly fee for the care of their loved one in one of these prayer camps. But in many cases, when you talk to the prayer camps, they say, yeah, the family will pay a little bit up front, but inevitably the payments trail off. And so there's very few people inside Ghana or outside who I think would argue that kind of being in the prayer camp business and caring for people with serious mental illness is kind of a money-making endeavor, although there is some money transacted. So the portions of the prayer camp that are home to people with serious mental illness are often referred to as a sanatorium. The sanatorium at Mount Horeb is home to about 130 patients with serious mental illness. Typically, there's no distinction made between types of mental illness. and roughly 80 were chained the last time I was there, which was December of 2016. I'll say a little bit more about that chaining in just a moment. To give you a sense of the flavor of the larger camp, the camp has the sanatorium, but on the same kind of premises or campus, there's also kind of worship spaces. This is one of the worship spaces. And there's also kind of dormitories for people who might want to come and stay at the camp overnight for some period of days or weeks in order to pray or be just kind of in close proximity to the prophet, who is the leader of the prayer camp, for other reasons. They may be coming to kind of pray for conception of a child or a new job. So on the prayer camp, you have this kind of worship space that is filled every day with people from the local community. Then the prophet lives on the premises, the prayer camp workers live on the premises, a number of dormitories for people who come voluntarily and stay for indeterminate amounts of time, and then the sanatorium as well. This is just a picture of the sanatorium to give you a sense of the physical structure. There's a number of these buildings, and inside each of these buildings would be 15 to 30 people who are really living there as patients, or you might call them inpatients, of the sanatorium. And again, this is just to give you a sense. It's set in a fairly rural area, and the camp is sprawling several acres, but this is from one of my visits. I was looking onto one side of the camp, and this kind of wall on the left side of the picture is the walled area that is the sanatorium where people with serious mental illness stay. So back to the RCT design. Again, this was a randomized control trial. There were two arms. One arm, and the question that they were basically asking, well, I'll say that in a moment. There were two arms to the trial. One arm was people with serious illness living in the sanatorium received prayer camp treatment only. And prayer camp treatment only meant a combination of fasting and prayer. Fasting is a theological practice of the camp. Obviously, so is prayer. But traditionally, the camp did nothing by way of kind of cognitive behavioral therapy or certainly distribution of psychotropic drugs for people with serious mental illness. The second arm, the kind of experimental arm of the trial, had prayer camp treatment plus, layered on top of that, psychotropic drugs that were brought in from the outside by the research team, who again were a combination of psychiatrists and psychologists from the University of Ghana Medical School. The primary outcome of study, which gives rise to the research question, was essentially a symptom burden index at 6 weeks. They used the brief psychiatric rating scale. They tried a couple of others along the way, but essentially that means the research question is, which of these two arms does better in terms of their symptom burden? Those that receive prayer camp treatment only, or those that receive prayer camp treatment plus psychotropic drugs? The secondary outcome is very interesting because the secondary outcome is days spent in chains. Days spent in chains refers to a practice that Mount Horeb, but also other prayer camps in Ghana, make fairly common use of, and that is they will chain a person with serious mental illness to an inanimate object. It might be the floor of one of those kind of dormitories that I showed you earlier. It might be a tree, anything that essentially restrains them, and restrains them in quite a barbaric way because there's often no kind of buffer between this spike chain and someone's leg. And so this was one of several practices that human rights watchdogs and advocacy organizations have come through Mount Horeb and other prayer camps and said, this is torturous, this must stop. Just so you know my methods and where I kind of gain my insight from, I did 5 data collection trips, again, at the invitation of the principal investigator to Ghana between 2014 and 2016. I won't linger on this too much, but on each of those 5 trips, I spent basically all day, 9 to 5, at the camp, observing camp life, and then also kind of watching how patients or people with serious mental illness were treated in the sanatorium, both when the research team was on site distributing psychotropic drugs and when they were not on site. So the first question is any kind of collaboration appropriate? And I just wanted to reemphasize that there really is no question about the fact that there have been human rights violations at Mount Horeb. On the right, you see a picture that was on the cover of a Human Rights Watch report of this chaining that I was describing earlier. This is a picture that I actually took when I was there at Mount Horeb. And so many people And one of the criticisms that appeared next to the RCT when it was published said, you know, this is completely unacceptable. Working alongside torturers in order to change the torturers' habits by allowing them to witness how effective non-torture might be would be completely unethical. And I would just say to you, in some degree of pushback, when I talked to the research team was keenly aware of the optics of this, and they recognized that there was an ethical risk here. But they really felt that the people who were staying in the sanatorium at prayer camps like Mount Horeb were the most vulnerable people that they could think of in terms of the mental health landscape in Ghana. And so therefore, they, as researchers and as care deliverers, really had an obligation to go there. So one of the research team said to me, when you see an opportunity to do good, you have to take it. Evil happens because good people keep quiet or walk away. And they continually emphasized to me, look, we know that there are torturous practices, but our goal in going there is to change that behavior. So they would say things like, my goal is that with the influence of the medications being made by psychologists and psychologists, the positive effects will begin to rub off on the prayer camp staff so that they don't do these harmful things. The second question that I wanted to tee up for our discussion was this question about the RCT design and whether or not the rationale for an RCT was really defensible in this case if the ultimate goal was behavior change. So this is, again, what I walked you through before, the two-arm randomized control trial design. And I just wanted to highlight for you some of the eligibility criteria. So the eligibility criteria to be included in the study was that you had to be a resident sanatorium. And then the psychologists and psychiatrists on the study team had to judge you as having essentially a mood disorder or a schizoaffective disorder that was judged to be appropriately and safely treated with available antipsychotic or antidepressant medication. To some people, this feels really tautological. Like, why would you do a study and say the inclusion criteria is you have to be treatable in our estimation with available drugs, and then ask a research question, do the available drugs actually improve the symptom burden of people living with these disorders? So the question is one generally raised of equipoise. Basically, does the research question rise to the level of meeting equipoise considerations, given that there may not be genuine uncertainty? Or many people look at the study and say there's not genuine uncertainty about the research question. I would remind you again that there were two sets of outcomes. One was the patient kind of behavior or symptom burden, and the second was the chaining. And I would just say, I think the chaining is the part where there really was genuine uncertainty. The research team did not know that if they came in and they were to give psychotropic drugs, if the psychotropic drugs would essentially change the behavior of people living in the sanatorium so much that the staff no longer felt the need to chain them. I think there was less genuine uncertainty around whether or not the symptom burden would change, but I just wanted to flag those two different outcomes and different levels of uncertainty. The rationales for doing an RCT were in part kind of to cater to the demands of the prayer camp. And the prayer camp actually said, by way of the profit, that if there was research to be done on site, it could only proceed on the condition that you, the study team, will compare your intervention with our spiritual intervention. So in some sense, when someone says that to you, look, you can come, but you can only do it if you compare yours and mine. If you're a researcher, of course, I think that tees you up to think, well, then an RCT might be well suited for this. There was also kind of a more sociological dimension to it, though, where a member of the research team said to me, the prayer camp staff have to feel that we don't look down upon them, which I think is part of their problem. And so again, this two-arm design, and particularly people will ask, well, why did you do one arm that was just prayer camp therapy only? I think this explains some of it, that they didn't want to come in, the study team didn't want to come in and be seen as taking over the camp entirely. So leaving one arm as prayer camp therapy only was a way of kind of softening or walking gently in what was essentially not the research team's home turf. And then I know I'm close to time, but I wanted to flag this for you, that the way that the research team justified the research question and made a case for equipoise being met in the research paper is here on the left-hand side. And they said, look, we know that these medications that we would be distributing have been proven again and again. They're longstanding first-line psychotropic drugs. But they said, look, the effectiveness of medication might be attenuated in the prayer camp setting because of one of many factors. Maybe the caregivers who are treating people in the sanatorium don't believe in the biomedical treatment. Maybe chaining and fasting, which is part of the prayer camp therapy, add counter-therapeutic stress, or maybe people with mental illness are really stigmatized by the residential segregation, and so that could undermine the effectiveness. So that was the case they made in the paper. And the case that the research team made to the IRB, an excerpt of my discussion with the IRB is on the right-hand side. So, I pushed and I said, look, I would have thought that the ethics board might question the study on the grounds that, is this a real scientific question? And what the team highlighted to me was that the question is, in this setting, meaning in the prayer camp setting, could you show that one group would do better than another, blah, 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 because it's never been done. So the novelty of the research setting and the idea that the prayer camp may somehow be a different setting in which psychotropic drugs work differently was clearly front of mind. My last point is just this one about incomplete disclosure and whether or not it was permissible. And I would say the prayer camp really did not fully understand the research and did not understand that days spent in chains as a secondary outcome implicated them as participants in the study, because the people who had control over days spent in chains were the prayer camp staff, and the prayer camp staff understood themselves only as collaborators, not participants in the research. So when I talked to the prayer camp staff about how they understood the research, they said things like this. We look at them as helping us, as if they're coming to help us. We see it like they come and they give us knowledge. And then another member of the same member of the prayer camp staff said, look, if there's real collaboration, meaning like we are to really join the forces, then your medication will not affect my prayer, the type of prayer that I want to pray, and my prayer will also not affect the medication. And I like that quote just because it really illustrates the extent to which they believed that kind of these two worlds, the medication world and the prayer camp, could coexist but live fairly independently. Whereas I think what I've shown you today is that the research team really had a goal of introducing the psychotropic drugs and definitely changing the behavior, maybe not the prayer, but certainly the behaviors around chaining and potentially fasting of the prayer camp staff. So the question is, the prayer camp staff could have clearly been more formally informed about their dual role as collaborators and study participants, but should they have been? The standards for deception in research, at least in the psychological world, are fairly clear, and you would need to really justify the study's significant scientific merit. You need to be fairly confident that the deception won't cause physical pain or severe emotional distress. And then the team has to ultimately debrief all participants and explain the deception. I think kind of the scientific merit here would be questioned by the mental health community writ large. And I think the question of whether or not it would create severe emotional distress is kind of open. The study team did not debrief the prayer camp workers who I'm talking about here. And they also did not flag the deception in any of their IRB materials. I really think that they were not purposefully withholding anything when they put in their IRB. I think it just didn't occur to them necessarily that secondary outcome of days spent in chains, it's a patient level outcome, but it really does implicate the prayer camp, because the prayer camp are the ones who have the ability to put people in chains and take them out. So it was really their behavior under study, but that was somewhat invisible at the time that the IRB went in. So my concluding thoughts, maybe just for us to discuss a little bit more, is that efforts to change the behavior of illicit actors is likely to continue to be a big challenge in global health, whether it's like drug traffickers or gangs or prayer camps or other kinds of shadow sectors. In many ways, this is kind of the last frontier, and this is where a lot of the really deeply ingrained cultural and behavioral practices that global health people want to change reside. And I think research is going to be continued to use as a tool. So when you don't have other avenues of necessarily getting money to just go out and do service, getting funding to do research is a convenient way to go in and catalyze the desired behavior change. And I think these two things are really in tension in the ways that I've described. So there's the question of whether or not any kind of engagement is defensible, whether or not research at all, and particularly randomized control trials, are the right way to ask behavior change questions. And then when you're doing behavior change, do you have to go in and very clearly say at the beginning, we are here to study an effort to change your behavior, or is some incomplete disclosure defensible? Thanks so much.
And now we're going to have Dr. Sierra Hernandez talk about a very different case. And hopefully we'll talk about the contrasts and maybe if there are any potential interesting comparisons.
Dana was saying, I will be talking about the experiences we had this last summer when we went to Peru to bring some ice core samples. And just to let you know, the site that we were was Huascarán, in the northern of Peru, northern part of Peru. There are different glaciers there. You can see all these different glaciers. And most of them are at what we call low altitude. That means that with the global climate change, the snow at the surface has been melting, so that water has percolated through the glacier and it has altered the signal that is preserved in these glaciers. And Huascarán, where we went, is at almost 7,000 meters above sea level. So because of the high altitude, the snow has not melted at the surface yet. So this mission was somehow like a salvage mission too, because it's one of the last glaciers in the tropics where the signal is still preserved, as you can see in these images, whereas in the other glaciers, there's no signal anymore. So what we wanted to do was to come here to Huascarán and obtain samples to obtain a 20,000 years history of climate and environment. And for this, we will drill 2 ice cores. We will extract 2 ice cores at the col and also 2 at the summit. These ice cores, just if, for those that don't know, they are cylinders of ice. They're 10 centimeters in diameter, about 1 meter long. So what we do when we go there is we make a small hole and we extract several meters until we reach bedrock in both cases. But so once, of course, this project started 2015 with the idea of coming back here. 2016, a small group went there to bring samples and determined that there was no melting at the surface. Then there was a proposal, of course, we got funded. And once we got funded, we knew we needed the permits. So we obtained permits from the government, Minister of Environment. Also, we partnered with the Institute of Peru that studies glaciers. And of course, after permits, we have to prepare all our equipment. Here. So you will see in the pictures. We have approximately 2.5 tons of equipment that we have to prepare. Once we flew to Peru, Lima, we stayed there for a few days to first bring all our equipment from customs. We talked with the government. We did press conferences. Lonnie, who is the leader of the expedition and of the team, this is Lonnie Thompson, he did a couple of TV appearances to explain the project. During these days, we also met with different journalists. There were journalists from, I forgot, but the most important newspaper of Peru, and also some that will have a blog in Peru. So we met with different people in Lima to explain what we were doing. After that, we moved with all our equipment to Huaraz, to the region in Huascarán. And what we had to do there was we started to acclimatize, because to go to high altitude, we need to start acclimatizing to the altitude. So we did some acclimatization. We received also our equipment, and we had to prepare it and get ready to bring all those tons of equipment to the mountain. And already during this time, when we were preparing our equipment, it's not going to be us who bring all these tons of equipment. We hire people that will help us with that. And we needed animals. We needed horses, donkeys. And there was a problem there that we actually didn't understand. We were discussing, because there was a discussion like we don't have enough, there are not enough horses or arrieros. Arriero is the person that owns the horse, and we load the horse with our things and bring it to the mountain. So we can only hire people from this family. And we didn't understand why. And then the price, because we need to bring empty boxes. No, they don't want to do empty boxes because they charge us by weight. So an empty box doesn't work for them, right? So, okay, no, so what can we do? It was quite complicated. How can we bring all these boxes and tons of equipment? We need more animals, we can pay them. It was really complicated from there, but somehow we managed to do it. Then we started here. This is the day that we came up to the mountain, and I'm showing you this picture because these are police, mountain police, and some other kind of police that were coming that day, because the following day, the president of Peru will join the expedition just to talk about the project, to show us his support, and then he will leave. So he came, we did all that, and actually the government of Peru came up with a video that I don't have here, but they explained the project. The president was there showing how he arrived in the helicopter, and he left. All the police left, of course. We were left to do our work, so we continue our work. That's Lonnie and some of our team members on the glacier, obtaining the samples. So they were finishing at the col, the first site before going to the summit, when we started hearing some rumors. Rumors that the locals were not happy that we were there, that they wanted us to leave. But everything was rumors. There was the arriero, the only one arriero that we could hire, that was working for the refuge and for us, that was informing our guide that what he was hearing in town, down the valley, that people were not happy, they will come. So we talked with people from the National Institute of Glaciers of Peru, and they started thinking, okay, what can we do to talk with these people and explain them what this project is about? So they set up some meetings with some of the leaders. Of course, this was not easy. They were, at the beginning, they didn't want to meet with the Institute of Glaciers, but after several communications between them, they agreed to meet. They had these meetings where they explained what because this institute is relatively new, so they explained what the institute is doing, where they are located, and they explained about the problems with glaciers in general and what this Huascaran expedition was about. And so that was, I've been putting kind of, I don't have a here, but I will be showing also kind of like the dates, because everything was happening too fast at some point. So that's, when we started hearing the rumors, was like a Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday, they were trying to set up these meetings. Finally, they got it on Thursday. And the following day, they had a radio program that I want to just show you a little bit about it. It should be here. So for this, they had this radio program at 5 a.m. in which they explain again what the Institute for Glaciers is doing, the Huascaran expedition, and different, all the different activities that the Institute was doing. But what we liked was, there was a song. So it's called Huascaran Expedition, and it really tells, it was amazing that it was really telling what we were doing. It says, with the science and technology, our future for prevention, something like that. So we got a song, and they played this program that morning and the following morning, and I think the song during one day. But it was, and this kind of music is what the people listen to in these regions of Peru. So that was the radio. So then, what I heard then at the end of those meetings, what they told me is that some people were happy with the explanation. They understood what it was about, but some others were still not happy, and they will still come to where we were because they wanted to see us, they wanted to kick us out, they didn't want anything to be taken from the mountain. So the following day, they came. How many? We think about 60 people. So here is the first view that we had from the refuge. This is, there is a helipad, and just to show you, so this is the mountain. Here, this is the beginning of the glacier. The col is higher above. Here is the refuge where Emily and I were staying, and Lonnie had already came back down a few days before that because of this problem, and to start coordinating how to bring everything down, the samples for the equipment, to bring it back down, because again, we had a problem with the arrieros. So to bring it back down to the valley and then to Lima and Columbus. But you can see it's pretty close, the helipad, and this is what we could see when they started arriving, that they were meeting just right there. And so these people, the locals, well, what locals? I don't know if you can see the names of the towns, but these are some of the small towns that are right below the glacier. Oops. So Musho was one of the main ones, Tumpa, Huayaypan, so several towns here, but there are other here that don't show the names. Here Google didn't show the names because they're quite small. But they came from all these towns, and these people are, or these groups of people are organized groups. They are called comuneros, so community, and they are really, it's not just the people from Musho, it's they are called like the community of farmers of Huascaran region, the community of water resources of this other region. So they are different communities there based on what they're doing. And the leaders of all these different communities were the ones that came with us that day. So that was early in the morning, they started coming up. These people live right there, so they can climb in a couple of hours. So we saw the first ones coming around 8 a.m., and then they were coming more and more. Some of them came all the way to the refuge at the beginning and were taking pictures, actually, but most of them stayed here for a couple of hours, and then they came. But before that, so while they were there at the helipad talking, I guess, I got some, I'm showing you here some WhatsApps because that's how we were communicating. I was WhatsApping with all the people from INAIGEM, the Institute for Glaciers. And what they found out, and they told me, the intention for this problem is the upcoming elections for mayors in all these towns in October. So, and the main leaders, the main candidates are these people. A professor who, she said, we will stay if needed at the refuge, but we're not gonna let them take anything because this is our Huascaran. I have talked to the two female, foreigners, that's Emily and I, and I know they are making several holes, and this will make that Huascaran will fall. So we did talk to her, but we did not say that. We had a completely different conversation, and actually we thought that they were happy with our explanation, but no. And another leader, Juan Factor, he has no job, no profession, and he dedicates to extort people. He created a web page, a Facebook page that was giving us a lot of headaches called Mucho Querido, to incite people to create this conflict. Another leader was a part of the government of one of the towns, Pariantana, that also, as authority, he is an instigator to create conflict. One more leader, Vicente Romero, Comunero. So he deserted from the Peruvian military, and he had several complaints for violence. So we're reading that, we know they are there, we don't know what to expect. And I read that to Emily and to Lonnie, so you know, so they know who we're talking to. So finally they came to the refuge, And most of them were saying good morning and just getting there. Some of them, can I take picture of the refuge? Yeah, you can take, because many of them have never been there. So that's how they were gathering there now. And I'm going to show you a little bit of the video, the beginning of this meeting. I don't know if it was a real meeting. So this is the mayor of Musho, the one that is talking here. And it will be one of the main persons in this conflict. And I think this is we cannot see here anymore, but there's the military, or the one that deserted the military. So at the beginning, what he's doing, he was, it's hard to hear everything, but he was explaining why they were there. And what he was saying is they wanted to know the objective of our presence there and why the United States, why it had to be the United States, because what he was saying is the U.S. is a very powerful country, why they have to come here. So, and at some point, so that was the beginning, and then here, you can see somebody started to trying to stop us from recording. So that's Emily behind the camera, everybody's turning, and then, sorry, she didn't want to be on camera, but. So then we had to stop recording, but that was an important point because there was Emily recording, there was somebody else recording from INIHEM, the Institute for Glaciers, and they just started saying, they're recording, no cameras, and you stopped it right away, but they came actually closer to the center of that circle and started screaming and telling us, no cameras, cell phones, hold your cell phones, so people have to put their cell phones on that rock. And we don't know what to do, right? We have all these, we know that these people are violent and can be violent, so we just left it like that, and we did not record anything else. So, okay, so that's still the beginning. This meeting lasted approximately 3 hours. During this time, once the mayor kicked off the meeting, then they started asking questions, several of them. But it was not really questions. They were not really asking us anything. They were saying things like, yeah, of course, they didn't want us there. Many questions or comments were about minerals. They thought that we were extracting gold, uranium, silver. Why they thought so, I really don't know. And at some point, somebody said, well, you will not bring the ice back, right? Because the ice is melting, and whatever we study is not going to bring their ice back for them. And other things that they were saying is, why didn't you ask for permission to come? Although we had our permits, we had a permit from the Minister of Environment, we had a permit from the National Park, we had all the permits needed. And they, also another thing they were not happy about was the president. Why the president came with no permit? For them, Huascarán, as you can see, is their backyard. So what they were saying is, how come he flew over us without stopping and saying hi to us? This is our chakra. Chakra is home. So nobody can come. If we go to our chakra, we will be in jail, right? So how can he come and do that to us? Why the United States? And at some point, I think this guy that you can see here, he said, I think 80 years old, and I don't care if I have to die, I will die here, but I will defend the Huascarán. Somebody else also said at some point, I don't care if I have to see blood running here, but I will defend the Huascarán. Somebody is saying also that he was ready to die. The guy that deserted the military was telling us, I was in the military, I'm trying to do this or that, so I'm ready to defend the Huascarán. And as you can see from this picture, most of them were men, a few women, 3, 4 women. There was a person with a machete, actually. I don't think he was trying to do anything, but he had a machete. Then after, we didn't really speak at all. There was one person from INIHEM, this guy from INIHEM, who was kind of answering every now and then, trying to say something and telling the people that he will bring all their concerns to his superiors so they could do something to help them. And whereas us, Lonnie, Emily, and I, at the beginning, the day before we were ready to answer, the way we are used to answer here, like what are you doing, why, more, not necessarily scientific questions, but more related to the ice, to global warming, but it was not at all that kind of conversation, so we did not speak at all. At the end of the meeting, there was this, I don't know if you can see, there's this other guy here next to the mayor of Musho. He had a book and he was writing everything down. So at the end, he was reading everything to us that was said. And then at the end, they wanted us to sign. I guess that we were present, but I told them I'm not gonna sign. If you want me to sign, I will say I disagree, and I will sign. And they told me, no, you have to sign because you were here. So no, I either sign saying I don't agree or I don't sign. So okay, then fine, don't sign. So I don't know in the end if the INIHEM person signed or not. But also I forgot to mention, with each single person that was saying their comment or question, they will say at the end, and I give you 8 hours to leave. Next person will also say, why are you here? Minerals, we never see anything, and I give you 12 hours to leave. Next person, same thing, their comment, and I give you 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. So they were all giving us different times, between 8 and 24 hours. So at the end, after they signed, or before they signed, I forgot, they came up and they were giving us, I think, 12 hours to leave, 24 hours to leave. And that's why I told them, like, no, I disagree and I will not sign. So after they closed the book and they were all happy, the volunteers that work at the refuge brought tea for the people, for us. So we were having tea, we were now talking one-to-one, and some of them were taking pictures. I was showing them the website to show them that we do have the results there. They can see them, the papers are there. They can even access the data at NOAA, and they don't have to work for an institution, it's free. But they didn't really care too much. But on the other hand, they were kind of interested in what we were doing and even understanding. So it was a completely different version of what we saw at the meeting. So after that, they left after several hours, and this is what they did at the helipad, several boulders there. So I think Emily removed some. They were quite big, quite heavy. But that was not it. So that's, I forgot, that was Friday. So then what happened in between? Well, we did have to evacuate on Monday, but that weekend was also a crazy weekend because Saturday there was another meeting, not with us, down the valley with the locals, the comuneros, and some of the government authorities, but they got just grilled just like us the day before. There is one friend of Lonnie who works for the government in this region who had called Lonnie that morning to tell him that we're going to have this meeting, we're going to propose them different infrastructure things that we can do here sooner than what we're planning to. And later we found out that he could not even speak. So he could not propose anything. They didn't let them speak again. So the decision at the end of that meeting was that they were giving us 48 hours to leave. So that will be, we had then until Monday at 6 p.m. to leave. But also during this weekend, we didn't see anything. We were up in the mountain, but we heard that they had already blocked some roads, that there were people with machetes down the valley. So the best thing was to not come down because something might happen to us. So the president sent the helicopter to evacuate all of us that Monday morning. It had to be early morning because the helicopter cannot fly at these altitudes later during the day. So we got evacuated, just the scientists, the foreigners, because there was a Peruvian scientist who we thought he can stay, he's Peruvian, all our cooks, porters will stay. They are Peruvian, so they should be fine, right? Because they just don't want the foreigners here. So that's what we did. By then, the work at the summit had been finished, so we had all the ice core samples ready, but now we had our 2.5 tons of equipment plus all this ice, which is other 3.5 tons. So we had everything there. Now we have to bring everything down. So that's why we thought that leaving the porters, all just Peruvians there, will be safe and they could bring everything down. So after we came down, it was also crazy. Here again, I'm showing the WhatsApps because that's how we were communicating and how I was communicating with everybody, police, INAHEM, porters, our guides. So when we came down that same day, we had a plan. The president told us that we would have the helicopter for the rest of the week. So we made a plan to have it Thursday, Sunday, Tuesday. So we thought that should give us enough time because the guys have to come and bring everything down. So it takes a lot of time. That's the plan, should work. But then at the mountain, one of the Peruvian scientist, Wilmer, was telling me it seems like there is another meeting that Monday. So there was another meeting of the locals deciding what to do. And they wanted to come and make sure that nobody was there, absolutely nobody. Peruvian, no Peruvian. They didn't want to see the camp. They didn't want to see anything of our samples or equipment, otherwise they will destroy it. So the following day, so that's still the Monday we came down. Tuesday, we heard from Felix, who is our main guide, and he's the one that is in touch with the arriero, and the arriero is the one living down the mountain and who knows about all these meetings. So he's giving him information. They will come down and will destroy everything. So Felix at that point said, I want to quit this project. I'm putting all my team at risk. I cannot hide, because what we thought at some point is, okay, they're gonna come, we can just hide and then we continue the work. And he was saying, I don't want to be hiding, because I will hide, then I will come out and we will have this same problem again. So that day 6, so then also talking with INAHEM people, then the police also had an infiltrator, a person, a spy in these meetings, who were telling them what was going on in these meetings. So the police had knowledge of this. So they sent some police to the mountain, and it was decided, because they had somehow information, the police, that there will be at least 100 locals coming to the mountain and destroy whatever they will find. So it was decided to evacuate all our porters, cooks, guides, and scientists. So it was also a crazy day, because, okay, what do we do, what we have, where do we put it, the helicopter, no, we leave it here, we leave it there. They work until very late that night, until 1 a.m. And then they came down the mountain from a different route. Initially we have come one way, so they decided, no, we're gonna go the other way so we don't get in trouble with these people. But in that morning, I didn't hear from them, so I just got a message that came late, actually, that saying, SOS, we have been retained by the locals. So we didn't hear, or we didn't know that until the following morning. And so all our porters, so it was 31 people, including 7 policemen that were with them, had been retained by the locals. They were outdoors, just laying on the ground, and they, what Wilmer told me, who was one of the scientists, or the last scientist, Peruvian scientist there, he told me that nobody slept, of course, they were called, and the locals were calling with megaphones to call for more people to come and help them, because they will inspect them all, and the idea was to get them naked, inspect all their things, make sure they were not stealing anything, and I don't know what else. But the police, there was one police that was in charge, and he was trying to keep the locals, try to have a conversation with them. So he kind of kept the situation calm, did not escalate, but still they were trying to call for more people. So what I want to show you is some Facebook video, actually. It's not playing. Well, it was playing. Do we have? Oh. Yeah, let's see. It plays here. I know it plays with some, depending on the networks, on the browser. So let's see if we can play it. What is the other? It's Microsoft. Oh, God. Yes. So let's see if we can get it. You know? Yeah. And they are being, there were about 100 policemen to free them.
Yeah, well, maybe can we get, so do you have like one more minute to just like talk a little bit about what happened so we give
Yes.
Dr. Cohen some
Yes.
time to respond to some of this?
So they were freed. We met, at the end, nobody was hurt, for sure. But we met with the mayor and the guy that had been, one of the main guys that had been organizing everything. And we ended up going to another meeting on Sunday to get grilled again. And in the end, there was an agreement that they will give us some time to bring everything down, but still, it was not a smooth process. Even after that last agreement, it was very stressful because we will know if they will come and do something. So we don't know if it was because of the president that came, because he disassembled the Congress during those days too, or really because there were elections. So we don't know exactly what happened there, what was the motivator for these agitators. So this is I think most of the people that helped, I might be missing somebody. And
Thank
that
you.
would be it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I have that?
So now we'll have Dr. Cohen talk a little bit from his own experience working from Anthropology.
Okay, so does this?
I think, let me put this on.
All right, this is me. I'm in the anthropology department. I do ethnographic research here. I just have to say before I start, I spent about a dozen years on the oversight committee for research here at OSU, and I don't mean to be short with either of these projects. I don't think either, if they had come up before the board, would have been approved for research. The ethics in both are just kind of shockingly missing. And again, I don't mean to insult the research, but it's rather surprising. So, I mean, having experienced in every possible direction working with people, there are rules, there are important rules that we have to meet, and important kinds of considerations we have to make. And it's not clean, and it's not always best things we could possibly do, but they're really important. So I have several things to talk about. I'm just going to, because our time is really limited, I'm just going to go to this. The majority of my research is on migration, on people moving from Mexico to the United States, other parts of the world, Turkey into Europe, Tajikistan and Central Asians into Russia and the United States, and most recently looking at internal migration in China, which carries with it an amazing level of ethical concerns. In every one of these projects, I tend to talk about what I call the crucial meso level. That is not looking at macro forces and not simply looking at micro forces, but looking at the intersections of those forces. And so I try to capture it here in terms of ethics. When we're talking about macro level issues, we're talking about what are largely, I think, institutional kinds of ethics. I mean, these are the things that are going to drive a place like Ohio State when we're making statements concerning work with human populations, when we're making statements around the ethics of different kinds of medical interventions, the ethics that come to us through the institutions that are funding us, through the researchers who, you know, we're all trying to make those connections and make those projects work, not just to be able to publish the results, but to, in fact, prime us for that next kind of grant. So that's kind of at one side, that's the macro side. At the micro side, and this is one that we confront constantly in the ethnographic setting, are the individual sorts of ethics. And these examples from Peru really capture that. This is when the people who you're working with may just profoundly disagree with what you're going to do on an amazing number of levels. And one of the questions then becomes, how do you manage that? You're trying to make these rather broad concerns meet up with these very idiosyncratic concerns. And so what I want to argue is the meso level, where we're trying to define maybe community ethics, which again, they're not going to be clean, they're not always going to be what we need to get our projects done, but what they're going to do is make us think about what is permission and what is permissible, who is actually granting what is permission and what is permissible. Is it in fact the state? Is it in fact another institution within the state? Is it our university? Those are very different structures than gaining permission from the community. Gaining permission from the community isn't the one thing that's going to make it work. I can tell you from a project where we were in 12 different communities, and we started by talking to the mayors of each town and their committees to let them know what we wanted to do and ask for their permission to do it. It was very different. That permission was very different than going to doors and asking people to let us interview them. So again, what's permission? What's permissible? Who's deciding? How are they deciding? What is maybe unclear in the ethics that we're putting together? In both examples today, we see what seems like clear kinds of issues, right? We want to create an intervention to potentially assist folks that are suffering from some fairly severe mental illnesses, right? What could be wrong with trying to address that? On the other hand, we're trying to learn about climate change. It's a big, big deal. But who's behind, you know, but who's part of the structure? Are, in fact, the people who are going to be collecting our data implicated in the outcomes of the results? Are the states that are giving us permission to do the work that we want to do somehow or another also influenced by the outcomes? And I think maybe the most stark example is to have a situation where you can describe somebody as a spy. They have planted inside of your population to somehow or another interact with people on either side. So again, permission, permissible, what's clear, what's not, what are the levels of that permission, what are they going to allow us, and so on. At the micro level, how are people interpreting these things? not to be really just too weird about this, one of my researchers was chased by a woman with a carving knife out of her house and into the mayor's office one day. This was about 7 years ago. And it really, it was an issue that we had to deal with, right? I mean, this woman was threatening my researcher, a young man named Jesus, and the mayor was busy laughing at her. And the dynamic there was something that I don't, we're still trying to think through as we prepare to go back this summer. What kinds of questions can we ask of these different people? We're academics, we have our language, we have our concerns, we talk about them in very specific ways that may not be the ways in which the folks we want to study are going to talk. One of the things that came out of a 4-year project on migration in southern Mexico were the number of people who kept telling us, why are you studying migration? This is something we all know about. Why don't you study something really important, like how do we keep our kids in school? It was very interesting to get that thing. Now, was that an ethical concern? I don't think so, but it did tell us that the questions we were asking were not the questions that the folks we wanted to work with were really concerned about all the time. So you have those sort of micro level, idiosyncratic, very malleable issues, and somehow you have to pull these things together. And so I would argue that the meso level gives us a chance to do that. It doesn't say that we're going to do it right. It doesn't say that we're going to be able to do the work the way that we envision it, but what it does is it allows us to take a step back from the structural kinds of patterns that we've been involved in defining the benefits and costs of our research and the ethical kinds of concerns of our research, to thinking about what might constitute success if we think a little differently, right? What might constitute ethics if we think a little bit differently, and what might constitute an opportunity that we don't necessarily see. And so that, for me, is the key, okay? It's ranging from, again, the individual to the group, from projects looking at climate to projects looking at, mental well-being. There's a lot of stuff that we have to try to hold on to. The directions are there to get us at least halfway there. The rest is through that, I think, those conversations that we have with the people that we're working with, the leaders that we're going to meet, to try to figure out really what will constitute success, not just for us, but for them, and what will constitute ethically sanctionable sorts of outcomes. I have a lot more, but I'll just stop right there.
So there's about 15 minutes left. So why don't I just open this up to conversation from the audience? Any questions that you might have for any of the panelists, or any sort of thoughts that you have that hasn't yet been mentioned, or further clarification? And if there's no questions, I'll start with one. So you guys think about things, okay? So we have 15 minutes. We still have time for discussion. So I think that one question that seems like an obvious question, moving forward from the two cases and from Professor Cohen's just really quick discussion, is just beyond regulatory and local government buy-in and approval, what do you think is needed to make sure that research conducted properly is respecting the community that is part of the research, or is that is closest to the research site? So what sorts of decisions need to, who needs to be involved, or what actions need to be taken, in order for the research to be done properly, besides the regulatory oversight? That's sort of my first big question.
I would say communication,
Mm-hmm.
because it was clear in our case. For me, it was clear, on the one hand, they were being manipulated for political reasons, but they have not been informed in general for years. They have been forgotten. They had so many problems that anybody could use them to turn them against somebody else. Mm-hmm. And in this case, if the Institute for Glaciers, which is relatively new, will have this communication with them and come more often to these towns and talk with the people and tell them what they are studying that they can come to them if they see any problem with the water or with the fish, because they had fish death in one of the meetings. So come with them so they can, there has to be a communication, I think. That is not going to happen like with the radio program that they did for us. It was too little, way too late. Has to be something that has to work over time.
Any other thoughts?
We have an IRB for working with human subjects, and my students and other people that I know constantly complain about how difficult it is to get your work through the IRB. This is why we have an IRB. It's so that you're preparing your documents and preparing your research in a way that is at a minimum respectful of the people that you're working with and not putting them in harm's way, okay? But it's also, and this gets lost in the process, it's also a moment for you to begin that discussion with yourself and with your community of how are you going to make this work. So,
Yeah.
So thank you for saying that, Jeff, about the IRB, and it's of course true. No, and I sat on the IRB for a couple of years, and I think people really don't understand what the IRB is doing and not doing what they're proposing in research. So I love that you brought up this idea that the preparation of that material is a point of reflection for the research team. It's not just a regulatory box to tick. It's a way to think about how all of your plans hang together and what their implications are more broadly. The IRB does not have any explicit question about the impact of the work on the community, or any question about any efforts that the research team has taken to connect with the community. And it's because it's not part of the federal code, right? The IRB, the flow of those questions comes directly from the federal code around recruitment, right? And that is how the IRB, it needs to meet those minimum standards. But Dana raised this question, like, what are we doing beyond the regulatory piece to connect? And I would actually say that the regulatory piece is actually pretty deficient. If we think these things are critical to do ethical research, there isn't even a place where a new investigator could begin to understand what some of the requirements are. So it's bigger than just separate from regulatory. The regulatory is deficient.
I'm gonna go on to that, and I was channeling the same thought. I mean, I think the IRB is woefully unprepared to think about, in an ethical way, what is a community agency to in fact, give permission. So what does it mean for a community to give permission, not for an individual to give permission? And it is a particular problem in these issues. When we think about community engagement and community work, we always are asking the question of who's going to give permission, and without much thought. I think this goes, I'll have to put a plug, it goes to the talk that I think we'll have in January, but it really is an issue about how we define who's the right agent in community work to give permission.
yeah.
And how you get that permission. So in that instance where you've got your workers, who's actually is part of the research, that group was never thought about in terms of consent as a group. So, but I think the IRB is woefully unprepared, but I think we conceptually are unprepared to sort of think about how we do that. And I think that's the work that this group can do, or something like this, because otherwise, we've got to sort of lead the regulatory group how to do that.
Yeah.
So.
And behind, did you have a question?
Well, I think I relate to both sides. Even though I'm not Peruvian, we live in a similar Andean culture. But I am also a physical geographer. That's how difficult it gets to, because you have like time constraints, money constraints, and I was watching from the side of my eye this project being held, and I was surprised by how amazing results it's getting. So this So do you think that a new, in the future, if you could go and get more data from that same valley, working with the same communities in the future, do you think that would be a case, that would be a possibility, or relations have been broken? And I say this in relation to this term that we call meeting. It's called tinku. So it's like the reaching of a solution through conflict. And this happens every day. And I just think that I'm sad that it had to be like that, but normally people in the communities, it's just wanting you to be happy. Don't panic. Do not panic. I've heard from some people like they're like so scared of their life. And this is so if the conflict was useful to give some solution to meeting, watching eye to eye, you're not longer this explorer. I think this is the problem with American science. They just want to be the explorers, like discovering the pharaohs come.
Yes.
So if you think that you can come back, then it's setting the conditions for even improve the IRB rules.
Yes. In our case, I don't know if we will come back necessarily to this side of Peru. I can tell you, you might know, Lonnie has been going to Peru since the 70s, but mostly to the south of Peru, Quelcaya. And last time we were there, we met with some local people whose parents have met Lonnie and who knows what he's doing and supports him, and they have a close relation, let's say. He has not come that often to this part of Peru. But I don't think there is a broken relation between us in IHEM and the local people. I think they were just not happy with the government, with all their their internal problems. They were even saying one of these assemblies or meeting or whatever, they were saying, we had the other day an animal that was robbed and we have no police, and now suddenly there is 100 police for this. So they have some other problems that they have to solve themselves as a community with their government. And in us, if we go back, I think we have to talk with them too, to meet. We try to do it, but we don't know what community, with who. You were saying with, it's a community with a person. We go to where we get invited, but we don't know where to go, but we would like to go for sure and talk with the people.
There's one, yeah? Tim?
I guess I work in research ethics in humanitarian settings, and I think what really needs to happen is that we need to push against IRBs being focus of the ethics of the projects, and that every researcher and faculty member needs to contextualize the broad ethical principles like the three groups of them there that
you're absolutely right about that. I personally was not happy also with that title because it can mean different things. And in general, there were other articles too that I think they were not really explaining neither the science nor the problems with the communities, that it was just more about the, I don't know how to say, but it was more about like the problem that happened. For me, most of the articles were not really ethical, and they were not really showing what we were doing and the problems of the communities. And even some people even tweeting these things and making it even perhaps worse. I don't think it was the right way to do it. But I was not responsible for that article.
So this is actually our time. I wish we had more time to have a conversation, but I think that it seems like what is obvious is that this is just the start of a conversation that we should be having institutionally about some of these issues, especially when it comes to, I mean, you know, IRB oversight happens with human subjects research, and there's all of this, like, there are all these social implications of our research, and also research that is done that's related to humans and related to the political context in which the research is being done, but it's about ice samples, right? So it's like, so there's a lot, I think, institutionally that we should be sort of, I'm hoping that this is generative of like the idea of really coming together institutionally and starting to really think about what it means to conduct research in a way that, you know, is, you know, is the kind of research that, you know, we want to be conducting, and we can continue sort of sustainably working with communities when we're there. So thank you so much for everybody for putting yourself on the line. Thank you, and thank you for the short conversation that we had. I think that this seems like a thing that we could also potentially return to in a future CARE event, since there's a lot to be talking about. So thanks for coming.